throughout this whole conversation, like it's been very evident that the approach that you all take behind, the AI ML algorithm or the different choices is really intentional. And one of those elements that I found really interesting in preparation for the conversation is the element in the role and responsibility that Redfin places on itself around data bias and addressing systemic racism through the different choices that you make with inclusion and exclusion for the data within your products. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about your perspective on data bias and just at the root level, how to make decisions to reduce or remove bias at the product or feature level.
Yeah, I think if you're in the housing industry, you really have to understand and have to take some pause at the fact that real estate has a really reprehensible history for causing neighborhood segregation and discrimination, especially for people of color over a long period of time. That's why we have fair housing regulations and all the rest. And so when you build machine learning algorithms or really any technology, you kind of have to consider, are we recreating some of those problems, but just doing that in an algorithmic way? So for example, when we created our machine learning algorithms, we had a choice to make about what kind of data to feed into the algorithm. And algorithms are more accurate the more data you feed into them. So we were considering, should we feed in a data set of demographics where it said, okay, well, this is the type of people who live in a particular neighborhood. Should we feed that into an algorithm that prices and recommends homes? And when we thought about it, we just said, no, we're not going to do that. Even if it makes the algorithm supposedly more accurate, we would not have a real estate agent, a human real estate agent, use that kind of data. And we certainly didn't want to have an algorithm use that data. We also took a stand on crime statistics. That's something that many homeowners ask our real estate agents for. There are places where you can get that information, but we thought about, should we put that on our site? We did a lot of research and we just weren't able to find a data set that wasn't biased by things like over policing and things that don't necessarily mean a neighborhood is unsafe. It just might mean that there's bias in how that community is treated. So we made a stand to not put that data on our site. And shortly thereafter, some other major sites decided to take their data down as well because they frankly agreed with the position. But you have to be careful and thoughtful because it's so easy to feed more data. There's data that's available. It's so easy to feed the data and not even think about it. But we have a responsibility in real estate to do the right thing.
It sounds like there's a lot of controls around the inputs of what data goes in. I'm curious if you have controls on the other side to measure, if you happen to be noticing any trends where the algorithm is outputting things that you might find to be, problematic recommendations that might also be, pushing towards something that might reinforce systemic racism.
Yeah, we have looked at that. We've looked at, does our pricing algorithm, does it show any forms of bias for historically Black neighborhoods and things like that? So we have tried to look for those things and then take action if we see a problem with it. So you do have to measure the output of your algorithms as well when you're developing something new. And if you see a source of bias, then you need to ask your engineers to take another look and figure that out.
You mentioned the user research team taking like a more formal approach to dive in. Is there like a high level process or framework to help like guide somebody? Like I'm just thinking of if we were to equip somebody with just like here's the general sort of playbook to go with. What would that look like?
Yeah, user research is a formal discipline now, so people can, you can learn about it in colleges and through online courses, and it's almost a mix of kind of an academic approach or more research-based approach where you take a big question, such as, are crime statistics biased? And you really go outside the walls of the company and into the real world and try to figure out what is going on. User research also relies often on talking to people, on watching customers using our products and interacting with them, and just looking at things in a different way from how an engineer or a quality assurance person might look at a particular set of products and how they function. So it just provides another voice when we're making decisions.
So I'm thinking about like with the teams that you're leading, are there certain questions that you ask folks on your teams to continue to like revisit the conversation around the inputs to the data for some of these different algorithms? Like, are there questions that you ask the team as like everybody's kind of working through the different considerations?
Yeah, we have an economics team that I've worked with on this subject where they've been able to bring up some questions, some of those things about how might we test an algorithm to see how it's performing and all those sorts of things. So we've connected that economics team with our machine learning folks to try to provide some statistics-based ways of looking at potential sources of bias, at looking at how our algorithms are really behaving and making sure that it's what we intended.
And if you were going to give a recommendation to somebody who is going from a place of this has been a blind spot to now having like focusing on this, like what would be your recommendation from a place to start to make this a larger priority and a part of their product building?
Yeah, I think, first learn about what are the sources of bias in your particular industry. There are, in every industry, there are books that have been written, there are talks that are given, there are leaders who've shared their own experiences about what it's like, and you can get smart on that. You can educate yourself on what might be happening in your own industry so that you know what to look for. And then, as I mentioned, I think hiring a diverse team is important. And then I think leadership has to make it a priority. You need to make sure that leaders at the company are really enforcing this and saying it's important. I know that maybe it will slow down a particular project, but this is a good reason to slow down. This is a good reason to be thoughtful, make sure that we're really doing the right thing.